All right, well, today we're going to look at two different historians. One by the name of Josephus, whom was a Jew turned Roman citizen, and another by the name of Tacitus. Both of these historians obviously had different theological perspectives, kind of overlap each other with their lives, but from what I can tell, didn't know each other, and yet both of them recorded some pretty extraordinary things about the fall or destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And so what I want to do for this episode is just really go over what they wrote. Not all of it, because it's a lot, but just some of the things that maybe you haven't heard before. Some things that are pretty interesting, and then just get your feedback. What do you think about these things? And I want to hear what you guys have to say. And so you're more than welcome to email us at heritageofgracebible@gmail.com, or you can also call us. You can either call us, leave us a text message at 208-391-5323, or just leave a comment here. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, before we do, here's the thing, right? I'm going to read these things, and there's a lot of information out there and opinions out there on the internet about these things, okay? I'm not saying that I subscribe to all of that stuff. I'm not a preterist or anything like that. But here's the thing, okay? I don't care if you are a preterist. I don't care if you're pre-trib. I don't care if you're I don't care what your positions in prophecy are. If you believe in the gospel, if you're saved, you are more than welcome to be friends with us. Don't really care. And with that being said, I'm going to show you why I started with that statement. So real quickly, it wouldn't feel right to do this without giving some Bible out there. So Ephesians chapter 2 says this. Ephesians 2 verse 4, "But God, who is rich in mercy, for his great love wherewith he loved us, even when we were dead in sins, hath quickened us together with Christ. By grace ye are saved." By grace ye are saved. Okay. And so if you look at verse 6, he says, "And hath raised us up together and made us sit together in heavenly places in Christ Jesus." So Christ Jesus is our focus, first and foremost. All these other things, okay, we can have different interpretations about a lot of different things, different positions, opinions, whatever, right? But let's not lose sight of the focus that should bind us all together, which is this right here. So obviously these are familiar verses for a lot of us. But what I want to show you is right here, verse 7, "That in the ages to come, he might show the exceeding riches of his grace in his kindness toward us through Christ Jesus." And I want to maintain that. I want to reflect that. I want to pass that on. And so let's keep this discussion respectful despite everyone's different views on prophecy, all right? So let's get into it now. Let's go ahead and take a look at Josephus. So what I'm doing here is I'm reading. I have a hard copy of this, but I pulled this up online. The font is small. It is what it is. Hopefully you can see it. But just to give you the reference, this is Josephus, Book 6, Chapter 5, paragraph number 3. Several months ago, our church did a Bible study on this, and we kind of went through all of what Josephus had wrote, Tacitus, and a few other guys, okay, and we just kind of discussed some possibilities. There are some people that believe we are in Satan's little season. Maybe next week we'll talk a little bit about that. And basically the conclusion that we came to was it's really the same thing. It's the same thing whether you believe Satan's little season is still yet to come, or maybe you hold the position that we're in Satan's little season. It's you know, we're battling the principalities and powers of darkness. Either way you slice it. So that's the conclusion we kind of came to. Now, I've always personally been, or at least for the last decade or so, been a post-trib, pre-wrath kind of guy. I don't believe that we're going to go through God's wrath. Got several reasons for that, but I'm always open to interpretations on prophecy. I'm always willing to discuss it and to be ready to possibly shift positions depending on what's happening in the world and how it lines up with Scripture. So that's where I'm at. I don't get offended too easy on prophetic things, but I think you guys will enjoy this. So let's get into it. All right, I'm just going to jump in mid-context. Okay, I gave you the reference. Do yourself a favor and actually read this whole thing. It's very interesting when you get a chance. All right, Josephus, Book 6, Chapter 5, Paragraph 3, begins by saying this: "Thus were the miserable people persuaded by these deceivers, and such as beguiled God himself. while they did not attend nor give credit, now look at this, to the signs that were so evident. Okay, now Josephus is going to begin to describe these, like I said at the beginning, these are some extraordinary signs. He's going to talk about a star or a comet that was in the shape of a sword that appeared over Jerusalem and lasted about a year. He talks about a heifer giving birth to a lamb. Doesn't give any explanation on that, so I'm just going to leave that out. Okay, but it is in there. What else? The Eastern Gate, which apparently was very heavy, took a lot of people to open. This thing apparently opened by itself. It was recorded that there was a voice heard saying, "Let us depart from here." He talks about armies and chariots battling in the skies. Some crazy stuff. Okay, so let's get into it here. And so that's what he's talking about here. He's talking about these signs that were so evident and so did plainly foretell their future desolation. Okay, now here's the thing. Okay, Josephus is writing these things, and he's basically writing it from the perspective like, hey, you know, your prophets told you this stuff was going to happen, and you got what you deserved, and shame on you for not believing what your own prophets said. Whereas Tacitus interprets these signs and these things that happened as the gods giving omens and blessing the Romans. Okay, so that's kind of going to be your difference there. He goes on to say, but like men infatuated with without either eyes to see or minds to consider, did not regard the denunciations that God made to them. Thus there was a star. Now look at this, okay? He says, thus there was a star resembling a sword, which stood over the city, and a comet that continued a whole year. So put down in the comments, what do you think about that? You guys think this guy's, full of it, or do you think something else? Okay, does this change your prophetic view? Now, let me also say this. There are people out there that they focus on this more than what's written in Revelation or Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. Okay, we don't want to do that. Okay, this is outside of the Bible, so just keep that in mind. I've been in churches for a long time. I've always heard Josephus' name thrown out there because he's a historian, not a Christian, that does confirm Christianity, does confirm Christ. Likewise, Tacitus, whom you'll hear from in a minute, he has a couple of famous lines as well. Oh yeah, so this comet thing, the sword or whatever, appeared over the city for a whole year. It goes on to say, thus also before the Jews' rebellion and before those commotions which preceded the war, when the people were come in great crowds to the feast which light lasted for half an hour. Look at this feast that lasted for half an hour. This light seemed to be a good sign to the unskillful, but was so interpreted by the sacred scribes as to portend those events that followed immediately upon it. At this same festival, also an heifer, okay, as she was led by the high priest to be sacrificed, brought forth a lamb. So, God, when I remember when I first read that, I was like, what? I had to read that a couple times. How does a heifer give birth to a lamb? And I mean, if this happened, I guess that would be a sign. I don't know. This is what he wrote, right? And this happened in the midst of the temple. I'm just going to leave that there. That's all I can do. Just going to leave that there. Moreover, the eastern gate of the inner court of the temple, which was of brass and vastly heavy, and had been with difficulty shut by 20 men, and rested upon a basis armed with iron, and had bolts fastened very deep into the firm floor, which was made of one entire stone, was seen to be open of its own accord. About the 6th hour of the night, now those that kept watch in the temple came hereupon running to the captain of the temple and told him of it, who then came up thither, and not without great difficulty was able to shut the gate again. This also appeared to the vulgar to be a very happy prodigy, or like an omen, a sign from God, as if God did thereby open them the gate of happiness. But the men of learning understood it, that the security of their holy house was dissolved of its own accord, and that the gate was opened for the advantage of their enemies. And so people of different classes are interpreting these signs in different ways. They're interpreting them according to how they want to see them, which, does coincide with human behavior. So these publicly declared that this signal or sign foreshadowed the desolation that was coming upon them. Besides these, a few days after the feast, on the 21st day of the month Artemis, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable were it not related by those that saw it, and were not the events that followed it so considerable a nature as to deserve such signals. Okay? So what he's getting ready to say here is pretty interesting, pretty incredible. For before sun setting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding of cities. Moreover, at that feast, which we call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as their custom was to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that in the first place they felt a quaking and heard a great noise, and after that they heard a sound as a multitude saying, now here it is, let us remove hence. Okay? So you got a lot of interesting things going on here. This apparent battle that took place in the sky, and they hear this voice that says, let us depart from hence. So it'd be interesting to hear you guys' thoughts on what that is. And then right after this, I'm not going to read this any further right now. Okay. But what he goes on to talk about, it's one of the, probably one of my favorite parts of this, just because it's hilarious. So he basically talks about this guy that is just running around and he's just preaching this message, okay? And let me see. I got it in my notes here. Let me just read a little bit more. So let us remove hence, and then look what he says next, okay? But what is still more terrible, there was one, Jesus, the son of Aeneas, a plebeian and a husbandman, who 4 years before the war began, and at a time when the city was in very great peace and prosperity, came to a feast wherein it is our custom for everyone to make tabernacles to God in the temple. Okay, he began to suddenly cry aloud, a voice from the east, a voice from the west, a voice from the four winds, a voice against Jerusalem and against the holy house, a voice against the bridegrooms and the brides, and a voice against this whole people. And then he goes on to say, this was his cry as he went about day and night. So, okay, he goes on from here just to basically talk about this guy. This is like all he said. This is what he cried out loud. This was his message for years, okay? He talks about the Jewish leaders beating him, the Roman leaders beating him. So everyone was tired of this dude, okay? And then Josephus records how during the siege of Jerusalem, a Roman catapult takes this guy out. And then that's just kind of where he leaves the story. And he's just like, yeah, finally that shut him up. So Josephus didn't like him. Nobody liked this guy. Obviously it's funny to read, but it's not funny in that sense. Obviously the guy that they're talking about here is apparently a believer, apparently a Christian. They didn't like that. What I'm laughing about is how this guy's message just tortured everyone. It just tortured these guys. They couldn't stand it. They didn't want to hear it because it's a time of peace and prosperity. And so they're just like, finally, this guy is a historian. Let's his bias slip. He's just like, finally, this dude got what's coming to him. And he got smoked. He got taken out. And so that he almost spends more time talking about this guy than he does these crazy signs that took place. And so, we're just going to leave it right there. So that's basically, in a nutshell, a very shallow overview of what Josephus had recorded about some of the events surrounding the destruction of the temple. And so again, he, his own words, he basically says, look, like this stuff would seem like a fable or so crazy, basically, if everyone didn't see it. So apparently he's writing this stuff with the confidence that, hey, no one's going to dispute this because they really happened. So I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on this. So now let's shift to a guy named Tacitus. Now let me get you the reference for that. All right, Tacitus. So the Book of Histories, that's going to be chapter 5, paragraph 13. And so again, we're going to jump right mid-context of this just for sake of time. So Tacitus here. And who was Tacitus? So Tacitus was a Roman. He did not like Christianity, but he unintentionally confirms Christianity. He confirms the crucifixion. Now let me read this. I'm just looking at the notes that I had when we did our Bible study at church on this stuff here. Okay, so from the Annals 1544, Annals 1544, type that into Google, this will come up. Tacitus is famous for saying this: Christus, so talking about Christ, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of Pontius Pilate. And that's really one of the strongest non-Christian confirmations of the crucifixion that we have today. He also is noted for confirming the rapid speed at which Christianity came to Rome and really throughout the known world at that time. He does also talk about how Nero blamed Christians to distract from his own evil, wicked doings and things of that nature. So he is going to mention the same things Josephus does: armies in the sky, the sign of the sword, the voice, what else? The gate moving, okay? But he just describes it a little bit differently. So let's get into it. So he starts off by saying prodigies. Okay, now what he means by that are omens. Okay, so remember, he is a Roman, not a Christian, not a Jew. Okay, him and his pals would have interpreted these signs as the gods are helping the Romans destroy the world of their enemies, and at the time being the Jews. Prodigies had indeed occurred, but to avert them either by victims or by vows is held unlawful by a people which, though prone to superstition, so you're talking about the Jews being prone to superstition, is opposed to all proprietary rights. Now look what he says right here. Contending hosts were seen meeting in the skies. Arms flashed. He's not talking about flexing the biceps. He's talking about armament, weapons of warfare flashed. And suddenly the temple was illuminated with fire from the clouds. Of a sudden, the doors of the shrine opened, and a superhuman voice cried, "The gods are departing." Okay, so this is how he interprets what had happened. Josephus said there was a voice heard, "Let us depart," whereas he says a superhuman voice cried, "The gods are departing." At the same moment, the mighty stir of their going was heard. Few interpreted these omens as fearful. The majority firmly believed that their ancient priestly writings contained the prophecy that this was the very time when the East should grow strong and that men starting from Judea should possess the world. This mysterious prophecy had in reality pointed to Vespasian and Titus, but the common people, as is the way of human ambition, interpreted these great destinies in their own favor and could not be turned from the truth even by adversity. So everybody interpreted these things according to how they wanted to see them. We have heard that the total number of the besieged of every age and both sexes was 600,000. There were arms for all who could use them, and the number ready to fight was larger than could have been anticipated from the total population. Both men and women showed the same determination, and if there were to be forced to change their home, they feared life more than death. So what he's talking about here is when the Romans went in to besiege and finally do the final battle, conquer Jerusalem, get that temple destroyed. Everybody squared up. Everybody fought. Women didn't matter because this was the last stand. Okay, and of course the Jews are interpreting these signs as God is helping them. The Romans are interpreting these signs as God is helping them. And so that's basically what you have going on here. Then he says, such was the city and people against which Titus Caesar now proceeded. Since the nature of the ground did not allow him to assault or employ any sudden operations, he decided to use earthworks and manifest the legions assigned to their several tasks, and there was respite of fighting until they made ready every device for storming a town that the ancients had ever employed on modern ingenuity invented. Okay, so you go on and look at Tacitus and Josephus, and so I'm just going to kind of end with this comparison. Okay, Josephus talks about the temple being filled with light. Tacitus does the same thing, the temple filled with light. Josephus says the eastern gate opened by itself. Tacitus says the temple doors were opened. Josephus says he heard a voice, or they heard a voice saying, "Let us depart hence." Tacitus records this as the gods basically departing the sanctuary. Josephus talks about chariots and armies in the clouds, and Tacitus mentions these armies seen in the sky. So this is why historians often compare these two individuals together, because they have similar accounts. There's obviously a lot more. I don't have time to get into it. Some of the stuff's pretty bizarre, if I'm being honest. Now, I'd like to hear what you guys think about this. Does this change your prophetic view? Does this fill some gaps for you? What do you think? Again, we can have these discussions in peace now. Of course, there's always a group out there that's like, oh, you're a reprobate and you're wrong, and they want to fight and stuff. Forget those people, right? Don't just ignore them. We don't need their input whatsoever. Okay, but I want to hear your input. What do you think these things mean? Do you dismiss these guys? Are there more people that have written about these same things? Actually, there are. Okay, don't have time to get into it this evening, but again, it is the gospel. It is God's grace that unites us. It's the fact that while we were yet sinners, he loved us. That's what needs to unite us believers first and foremost. The fact that we've been made right with God. We're sanctified. We're set apart. We belong to God. Let's not forget that before we were saints, we were sinners, and God is the one who gave that increase and made us saints. So let's keep that the center. Let's keep that the focus. Let's keep that as the focus of what unites us. All right, that needs to be preached first and foremost and taught. Okay, we can have different opinions about what this stuff means. It's interesting. Okay, we need to get back to the days where we can discuss these things and have different opinions and still come together in that love that Paul taught the Ephesians, he taught the Colossians, and basically all the saints that were alive during this time and after. Okay, so again, leave a comment. Let us know what you think. God bless. I will see you next time.